I want to talk about not just growing, but utilization of forages for grass-fed beef and what that means for us. So forage production is linked to soil fertility, rainfall, and temperature, and it is a dynamic process, as we know. I mean, it's ever moving. You got a short window of time, and then we need to move on from there. So forages for pastures, we've got obstacles, we've got opportunities and stocking strategies for forage use, animal production, animal performance, and an acceptable carcass. So, what's the target? For the management efficiency and profit potential, and we were looking for profit potential, what is the target that we want to have? Grass-fed, right off winter pasture, 1,100 pounds. No creep, 3.5 pounds a day gain. You like to show the models. This is a good model, this is a good target. Right off winter pasture, continental sired, heifer, replacement or not, or grass finished, off of Bermuda grass, 1,100 pound calf, or right at weaning. Not 1,000 pound, but 9.5. Hereford Brahman cow, the terminal sire that we used would be Angus. So lots of different breed types. Dr. Pascal is going to cover some of that. So you can see, we're going to talk about matching genotype by environment. That is the key. You know that. If you don't know that, that's the key. Genotype by environment for the plants and genotype by environment for the animals. Us too fit into that environment. So I don't know where you're from. Are there non-Texans here? Okay. Good. Welcome. Bermuda grass, sort of the captive audience for a lot of the pastures that we have, and you can see as it runs across the United States, and in the middle of there is tall fescue. Any of you out-of-staters are in the tall fescue country? Good. Some of the earlier conversations had to do with sensory traits and how it's affected by the forage. Tall fescue is one of those forages that does leave some unfavorable sensory traits. So, annual ryegrass, you can see that grows across except for South Florida. South Florida's in a mess today. They're having tremendous drought down there. Some of the legumes, most all of these, we produced and bred at the Overton Center with the exception of red clover and ball clover. The arrowleafs, the crimson, and the whites are those products of Dr. Ray Smith. So, crimson arrowleaf and other annual clovers have a good pattern of growth throughout the southeast. White clover covers from north to south. Some of the objectives and goals, the perceptions. We perceive to have a product base, and Dr. Gill did a great job in sort of laying out what you may expect and what you want to target. So beef quality traits, the environmental components of that. And so our expectations are the niche market. You're going to succeed. You have to create, you have to be a part of the niche market because that's what this is. A lot of other crops and animal products are also niche. An enhanced quality of product. Something that sells not just once. You're in the car dealership. You don't just sell one car and stay in. You sell every car that person's going to buy. You sell every piece of meat that person wants. Environmental enhancements and economic benefits are the expectations. And then the reality sets in, and Dr. Gill did a good job of setting the reality. What size is your operation? We're going to talk about pasture and forages, the dry matter, and the quality, nutritive value. That drives your success with forages for grass-finished, grass-fed beef. What class of type of livestock for harvest? Is it a calf at weaning? Is it a stocker? Where are you going to get it killed? Where's the harvest site? Whoops, I didn't think about that. No, you're going to think about all of these, or you're just going to ease in, and then you'll discover where is the harvest site, what's the frequency, is it daily, is it seasonal, what kind of packaging, where are you going to store it? You have a freezer, how are you going to market it, how you merchandise it, what's the size of the products, how are you going to get it delivered? You've thought about this, or if you haven't thought about this, Dr. Gill laid these out. I'm going to enumerate them again. How are you going to get paid for it? What's your payment schedule? Is there cash flow? How are you going to manage it? How are you going to manage all that? Well, the perceptions, expectations, reality, what do we have? We have forage species and systems. What do we want? How do we get there? In 2016, you know, we give a lot of talk, and the industry talks about, and we share that. about sustainable beef. What is sustainable beef? Well, in 2016, the global roundtable for sustainable beef sort of narrowed it down and said that sustainable beef is a combination of a socially responsible, environmentally sound, economically viable product. Okay? What does that mean for you? Well, is it sustainable? Is what you're getting into, or is what you're in, is it a moving target, or is it have stability? I look at it like this. Environmental aspects are down here with whatever vegetational zone you're in, the pasture ecosystem, whatever that may be, and the economic returns and rewards, how much risk there is, and do you have a stewardship legacy component in your ownership, and all this in here is the socially responsible, and that's called you and me, that's management. That's the management strategies, and above all of those that we get involved in, stocking rate controls and sets the tone for animal performance. And forage sustainability, pasture sustainability. When you put all those together, you have something that looks like that, and that is the socially responsible management that leads to sustainable or unsustainable beef and or forages. So, some of the obstacles and opportunities for that, let's move right on and look see what that says. The niche marketing of beef, is it organic beef? Is it natural beef? Is it lean beef? Is it grass-fed, or is it pasture finished? When you pick one of those, you'll have to meet the guidelines or the mandates that defines whichever one though it is. And I got most of this in your PowerPoint, about 90%, but you don't put everything in there. So some of it's not included by design or default. So, we're calling something, and I was visiting just this past week with someone in East Texas, and they had something they would call naturally good beef. What was that? It was naturally good. Well, it probably wasn't natural beef, but it was naturally good beef. So a salesman's opportunity to use a little verbiage there to move right on. So if the niche is grass-fed or pasture finished, the risks include always the climatic vegetational zone of production. Where in the world are you? The seasonality of production. Any forage is not a 365. It's seasonal, you know that. Frost, winter, the warm season, perennial grasses, forage nutritive value. Okay, forage requirements is availability of dry matter. Above all, you have to have something there for the dry matter, the mass, forage nutritive value, protein, total adjustable nutrients, TDN. The seasonality, it could be growing for 60 days or 150 days. Depends on where in that environmental area you are, what kind of gain. We throw some numbers around and let's just go ahead and arrive at some. We'd like for those calves to gain, I think, over 2 pounds a day. Dr. Gill said, we're looking for fat. Looking for fat on those cattle and fat on those animals for the sensory traits that we want. So let's just pick more than 2 pounds a day. Body condition score, I think, ought to be 6 or more than 6. That could be subject for argument. I got the mic, so we'll say it's going to be that. Total body weight at harvest. What is that? 300 pounds or 1,100 pounds? So the composition of gain, is it calves like this that have gained on winter? This is winter pasture, but you see the Bermuda grass is coming through. These calves have gained less than 1.5 pounds, about 1.3 pounds. These calves have gained almost 3 pounds a day gain. And looking at some other data says that if it's gaining nearly 3 pounds a day, then at a steer weight that moves out to about 1,100 pounds, you can see the percent body weight, the body fat, of that calf, it accelerates, whereas the calves that are not gaining any weight, they're flatlining. And they're never going to gain above 10 to 15% fat. And that's a component of the sensory trait that you have to offer. So the pastures and forage systems that will allow 2 pounds a day or more includes this, and those of you not in Texas is going to be the same thing, regardless of, except if you're in Canada, but if you're anywhere in the United States, the southeastern United States, it's going to involve these. Cool season annuals are always the highest quality. Then the warm season annual grasses, the cool season annual small grains, annual ryegrass, clovers. Warm season annual grasses, May, July is when they're going to grow, July, October with supplementation. And the warm season perennial grasses is when you can harvest those, would be April through June or July through October. with supplementation. You say, well, supplementation, does that fit? I don't know. If it fits into the product you're selling and you're advertising, it fits. So the warm season forage classes, warm season perennials, annuals, cool season annual forages, and cool season perennial grasses, forages, and this is tall fescue and alfalfa. So there they are. This is just a brief mixture for the most of Texas. The Bermuda grasses and Bahia grass, Dallas grass would be east of I-35, and then west of I-35 you'd move into the bunch grasses. The warm season annual grasses, pearl millet, brown midrib, sorghum sudan, crabgrass, clovers, ryegrass, small grains. We talked about those. So the forage calendar. I think we're all starting with a plan. What months do we have? Talked about I-35. I-35 is right here. Blackland, cross timbers and prairies, comes right down this way. The hill country, Everest Plateau, comes right into South Texas. Why did they build I-35 right there? Because it's easier to build on blackland than it is in the hills. So we use that definition because the vegetation, those are 10 vegetational areas in Texas, and the I-35 kind of gives us visual representation, and that means that certain forages grow to the east and certain forages grow to the west. So warm season perennial grasses, and that's their trend. Most of the case, if you're in far South Texas, you may grow all year long. But in general, let's just pick with East Texas. We have our first killing frost is going to come about mid-November, and the last killing frost about mid-March. So April through October and into November is the growth period for warm season perennial grasses. It's the good news, the bad news on the warm season perennial grass. We've got a lot of it. It's the highest dry matter, provides the most sustainable pasture systems in Texas. And the bad news is it's the lowest nutritive value category of all forages. Yes, ma'am. Okay, she said this. If you're not exactly what forage you have, or your particular site, or where what you have the potential to grow, NRCS will come out. They'll help you do a pasture plan, look for your soil, and make recommendations. Thank you. Good point. Bad news is they're the lowest nutritive value category of what we have. Back to this, the seasonality of production, total dry matter, reliable, and nutritive value. The Bermuda grass and warm season perennial grasses has this peak, and most of this data, all of this data I'm showing you, is from the piney woods. It'll take a different peak if it moves anywhere else in Texas because of what? Temperature and rainfall. This is a general peak of forage. You say, well, what's the proper stocking rate for that? Well, we can adjust that stocking rate with this. If you're going to be in the forage animal business, you're going to have flushes of this, and in the rangeland west of I-35, hay production is not something that is a norm or not, but when you move east with the Bermuda grasses and higher productivity, you're fertilizing, you're wanting to save rather than waste, so, you know, you're making hay. So, does anybody remember when hay was $1 behind the baler? Well, you know, it's the same price today for us in East Texas. But that's what it costs to load it. Well, you know, I don't want to get into the hay thing. I get wrapped up in that and I get excited, but we're going to move past that. So, nutritive value ranking is low. Warm season perennial grasses, they're at the bottom of that list. We got these that we're going to talk about some. Tifton 85 Bermuda grass is the highest nutritive value Bermuda grass that we have. And I'm going to show you just a minute why that is. It is an interspecific hybrid between Bermuda grass and star grass. What's that mean? It's not the same as the old Bermuda grasses like coastal Bermuda grass and common Bermuda grass and Midland and Alicia and things like that. It is a definite interspecific hybrid, and we'll show you in just a minute what that means. The nutritional value of Bermuda grass and other warm season grasses is limited by the high concentrations of fiber and lignin that reduces digestibility. Lignin is the component and the chemical that keeps those trees upright. It also keeps those plants upright, and it's non-digestible. So measurements, when you send a forage sample off, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand who sent forage sample off, but who hasn't sent a forage sample off, but you don't know what's in the hay if you're buying it, and you don't know what's in the forage if you're grazing it, unless you run a forage sample. Some of the data you're going to get back is going to have NDF, that's a nutrient detergent fiber, and that's a representation of cell wall. And acid detergent fiber, I'm going to show you in just a minute what the difference between ADF and NDF is, and crude fiber, which is a combination of NDF and ADF. That would be that whole cell wall. Now here we are with an immature plant cell. It looks sort of like this. Everything inside is about 98 to 100% digestible. This is what the animals want. That's the sugar. That's what drives them. What holds the plant with some structure is the primary cell wall, and in that primary cell wall is primary cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin, cutin, silicon, and tannins. Now the primary part of Tifton 85 is that the bonding is different for the lignin and hemicellulose-cellulose complex. It's different in Tifton 85 than it is in coastal Bermuda grass, for example. And that's what allows for the enhanced total digestible nutrients, even though cell wall contents, you get it back and say, well, the cell wall is the same. They're both 65%. What are you talking about? Well, if you'd run a TDN sample, the analysis that you'd get back would show Tifton 85 is much higher. Now let's have something, as the plant matures, it does this. This area that's 98% digestible is much, much less, and this area that is variable in its digestibility is much greater. And so that's why as plants mature, as they age, as they go through the summertime, if it's a warm season perennial grass, that's why they get less and less digestible, primarily because of the cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin component. Okay, the factors that affect that nutritive value, of course, is forage species. Annuals are always higher quality than perennial, regardless. Legumes are always higher quality than grasses. The age at harvest, young is better than old. Rainfall after the cutting, season of harvest. Fertilization. You know, one of the things about fertilization, we have this information we start giving, and we say, if you want to enhance nutritive value, then fertilize. Well, here's the facts, is that fertilization by itself does not affect nutritive value. Fertilization promotes new vegetative growth, and that new vegetative growth is higher in nutritive value. So it's sort of a indirect method, but it's not a direct. And this is sort of the hay package, if you will, type of hay package, where you're going to store it, inside or outside. Maturity and forage yield, and this is sort of a hay scenario, but it also meets the same demands as if you're grazing, is that with time, dry matter production increases and nutritive value decreases. So we picked, the data has picked somewhere in that period of time right there as an optimum, and for, let's just pick something we might all know, and that would be coastal Bermuda grass. We pick a 4 to 6 week harvest date so that sort of optimizes, not maximizes forage yield, it optimizes forage yield, and it minimizes the decrease in forage nutritive value that we see. This was done in the early 60s and into the 70s by Dr. Burton, USDA at Tifton, Georgia. Dr. Burton released coastal Bermuda grass in 1943. He released Tifton 85 in 1993. Okay, Tifton 85. Talk a lot about it because it has a lot of good opportunities for us. It does challenges for us, but the successes are good. If you've not seen Tifton 85, that's what it looks like in the alleyways of the pastures. That would be more than boot high. That would be fence top high. So it is a great forage for backgrounding and for when you wean calves in the fall. It's a great forage for stalkers or cow-calf as a standing forage, deferred forage, rather than cutting hay and feeding hay, graze right on in past the winter. But that's what it would look like, and that is a midsummer look. So Tifton 85 has higher dry matter production and drought tolerance than other Bermuda grasses, has lower lignin concentration than coastal. It's a different type of bonding. We've talked about that, higher digestibility, and because of all of that, guess what? You get higher animal performance. coastal Bermuda grass, one of the obstacles Dr. Burton faced in 1943, he had a great, great plant, but the seed were very, very infertile. They're seed viable in coastal Bermuda grass, not many of them. Very infertile. So he devised a way to vegetatively plant. Why would you, a system that you wouldn't normally accept? Most of the hybrid Bermuda grasses are vegetatively planted, and with Tifton, like some of the others, jigs, Tifton, even coastal, you can plant the sprigs, the roots, or you can plant the tops. You plant the tops, the stolons, where the nodes are, have a node, and when those stolons, which run across the top of the ground, rhizomes that go around in the bottom, at the node is where the potential root is going to be made. So that's a long answer, but the answer is yes, they have to be vegetatively planted. They do not have, there's no seed production of them. There's other seed production of other Bermuda grasses, and so that would be an easier source and a loss of opportunities there. We've got some data on loss of those Bermuda grasses, but for the highest quality one, it would be Tifton. Warm season annual grasses, some of those we're not just going to list them and show them. We're going to move on, but those are the ones of choice. Would be the brown midrib, higher nutritive value, less lignin than are some of the others. Crabgrass can be a great forage for you or a weed. It comes into play if you have prepared seedbed small grain and you want prepared seedbed small grain, then crabgrass would be a good opportunity to bridge about 60 days of the summer without just having bare ground there. So it fits in there. When it's in the Bermuda grass patch, in the Tifton, it's a weed. So we want to kill that. Small grains, and here's the beginning into the real component of the forages that's going to be required and mandated for forage finished beef, in my opinion. This is where the nutritive value is. This is where some of the obstacles and strategies and for management occurs, because in small grain ryegrass, regardless of which area you're in, we have a small peak of production in the fall. And that small peak of production, you get excited about that, you set your stocking rates, and all of a sudden winter comes in. Now, we didn't have much of that this year, but that's a moving target. Winter sets in with low growth, and all of a sudden the stocking rate that was so good there is overstocked there. We call them winter forages, but really they are spring forages because the growth of these pastures accelerates from about mid-February into now, first part of May or late May, depending upon if you have ryegrass in that small grain. So the stocking rate for this part of the season is about 2 or 3 times what it is over there. That's the challenge. That's one of the obstacles, and you meet that challenge with all forages by knowing what they're going to do in advance of saying, "Dadgum, he didn't tell me about that." If that's your statement, then you should have read something or looked something or called something up to say, with the forage business, forage crops, what can I expect in 30 days from it in this environment? What can I expect in 60 days? And you need the escape routes in case it doesn't occur, and you need to make sure that you can make optimum utilization and stocking rate of it. Let's move on here with the nutritive value. The cool season rankings, the ranking is high with the annuals, small grain, wheats, oats, and rye. Didn't put barley, but that's also a component. Annual ryegrasses, clovers, and other legumes. So, winter pasture checklist, soil test, soil test, soil test. We're going to show you about that in just a minute. And the fertilizer requirements, what variety did you read the tag? What variety is it? The seeding rate, small grains, depends. If you're west and looking for wheat for grain, then perhaps it's a bushel. You move east and looking for wheat or rye or oats for forage, it's 100 pounds of wheat, 100 pounds of seed per acre. Timing and method of establishment is fall. Seasonal forage production, initiation of stocking, when you want to do that as early as you can without overstocking and preventing more growth, and stocking rate adjustments. So we have these particular species available. The Gulf was released out of Beaumont in 1963, then followed by Marshall, which is the first cold tolerant. And if you're ever going to breed a plant, Marshall's the kind you breed. You watch it for 25 or 30 years, and you keep watching, it does so good, and then you go out there and you collect seed from it. You haven't done anything but let it grow. It's an ecotype that did really well in Mississippi, collected the seed, voila, they've got cold-tolerant Marshall, and the seed of that then is a parent for TAM90, released at Overton by Dr. Nelson. These are the diploids, and then below this are the tetraploids. And what does that mean? The tetraploid ryegrasses are some of the most productive ryegrasses with respect to longevity of the grazing period. They're earlier and they're later. So that's a lot of choices there. Look on our website, and you can find several years, and I'll show you that website ID in a minute, but you can find several years of repeated small plot yields of small grains and ryegrasses. In general, prepared seed bed is always going to produce more than sod seeded. Sod seeded is fighting competition with Bermuda grass or some other sod. The reliability of dry matter in fall and winter, small grains, always more reliable than is just ryegrass, and those both are more reliable than is clover and provide longer and more grazing time. So, rush through these. On Bermuda grass is what we do. We lightly disc, and that means we are disking with just a light depth, a short depth of 2 or 3 inches, just to do 2 things. Tell that Bermuda grass we're still in charge, and we'll slow their growth down and create a soil environment. So when we pull a drill, a regular grain drill, not a sod seeder, you can go a sod seeder, but on this, we don't need that. Small grain drill, and followed by the grain drill is a drag. Plant that, it looks like this, not torn up. And in just a few days with moisture, here comes the small grain, and that small grain that's there is rye. Cereal grain rye, not to be confused with ryegrass. We use cereal grain rye because of the choices that we might have, rye, oats, or wheat. Rye is the most tolerant of acid soil conditions. So the low, and we in the East Texas, east of 35, you can have, except for blackland sites, the pH can go below 6. And when you have pHs of 5.5 to 6, then we have problems with growth of most any forage except Bermuda grass, which is very tolerant of those low pH. But this is the target, rye, and we use Maton or Elbon rye, make sure it's the forage rye, is more tolerant of low pH than is wheat or oats. Fertilizer becomes one of our obstacles. It becomes one of our opportunities. But if in your area, if fertilization is mandated by soil test, then fertilization is what it's going to take in order to make that crop grow. What does that mean? If you're putting on inorganic fertilizer, do you qualify as an organic beef producer? So maybe you want to produce naturally good beef. Nitrogen drives grass production. Nitrogen drives it. So fall-born calves, and fall-born for me would be September, October. Small grain ryegrass or clovers, harvest at weaning off of the warm season perennial grass, and that harvest would be May through July 15. And in the winter, they'd be grazing, part-time grazing perhaps with those fall-born calves. And then when they start laying down, we'd take them off. That'd be about a 2 to 3 hour grazing period, and then move them off. And then we're going to match that peak of growth with either continuing to stay on small grain, or we're going to move them to annual ryegrass or clover. Annual ryegrass is then, it stresses ryegrass in the northern part of Texas to be available for grazing in January. That kind of depends. But as we move south and east, then certainly we can graze them in January, maybe even December. But by mid-May, the ryegrasses are out of the pasture, except for the tetraploids. And the tetraploid ryegrasses, we named them. Remember Prine, Tam Tebow, and Nelson? Those will linger with nitrogen fertilizer and water. They will linger into June. So if you're not prepared for the delayed growth of ryegrass in your Bermuda grass pasture, don't call me and say, Dr. Roquette, why'd you say plant that tetraploid? Plant the tetraploid because they have earlier and later, but be prepared that they are later. And when they're planted in Bermuda grass, you've got that transition that you have to be prepared, increase stocking rate, or be prepared to make hay. You do not want to carry it into the summertime with standing crop. We showed these. Let's look at those just a moment. So with ryegrass, they would look like this in early spring. And then this is Nelson. And this picture could be taken yesterday. Wasn't, but it could be taken yesterday. And we're going to talk about most of the calves that coming out of crossbred. These are F1 Hereford Brahmins with the Continental Sired calf. Today, those calves are weighing 6.5. Some are weighing 7. The cow is about 12. Dr. Gill showed an average. This old cow fits right in about that average. She's about 12.5. That's what she is. This calf is 6.5. But the rate of gain is about 3 to 3.5 pounds a day gain, getting all the forage they want, ryegrass, getting all the milk they want. And if this is your goal, may not be your goal, you may want to sell those calves earlier to someone else, but if this is the goal for you for grass finished, then you can reach that 900-pound calf when we have ryegrass is headed out and the Bermuda grass is just starting to break in, whether it be with a Continental Sired or Angus, and we can call this Continental Sired, but this is an Angus Sired, terminal Sired for this grass-fed production, or animals look like that. Okay, move into cool season annual legumes, the clovers. We talked about why we want to use that. Well, if you're organic beef, and you're not liable to put nitrogen on the grass, then you're going to clovers. Okay, clover established mistakes. pH too low, should be 6 or higher. The grass doubles too tall. Seed placement needs to be in touch with the soil. You got the wrong clover species and the wrong soil type. Whoops, that doesn't work. Late planting, best planting date depends on a balance of temperature, soil moisture, and that's going to be in the fall. And so that may be a good photo op, but at the same time, that's arrowleaf clover. We're just initiating grazing, and that was by design and not default, because as we move into the season, then we'd have calves that would match those ryegrass calves, and this would be a fall-born calf, and this is a picture that would be about now. Calf weighs 6.5 to 7. Now, when you come off, the arrowleaf clover, Bermuda grass, he's a 875 to 900-pound calf without nitrogen fertilizer. Okay, he's got growth trait ability, and he's got forage trait ability. So those 850 to 900-pound calves is not that rare and is attainable. But nitrogen drives the grass production. How do you know how much nitrogen you need? Well, take a soil test. Now, a soil test, whoops, this didn't come out good. The soil sampling, either an auger or a shovel, we're taking a soil sample in the top 6 inches, and we're taking a soil sample that would be representative of that field. Now, if you've got an area that is all level and it looks like it's the same soil type, then take 10 or 15 samples, sites, and put them in a bucket, mix it up, and send that in. A&M's got soil testing at A&M. SFA, Stephen F. Austin has soil tests there. Send it somewhere. Your county agent knows the address and the procedures of getting that done. Don't send in the stubble. Wipe the stubble off. Let's look here just a minute. Now, this is a big table. When you get that soil sample back, this is what you get. And you say, what in the world? What is this? So you send it in, you tell them what you want. This is improved hybrid Bermuda grass, it's non-irrigated, and I want 3 hay cuttings. You tell them that, and they send you back all this stuff here. The first thing is pH, and it says 5.2. Now, Bermuda grass does quite well at 5.2, but there's some other problems, and it says that it is strongly acidic, and it's going to tell you down here, whoop, limestone recommendations are based on 100 ECCE. We're going to tell you what that is in just a minute. 100 ECCE, and the limestone applications, more than 3 tons per acre should be But that's not what you're going to put on. You're going to put on the recommendation of the limestone is right there, a half a ton. You call up your guy and say, hey, bring me a half a ton of lime. And he said, Are you a newbie? They're only going to spread a ton. And you say, I got a bargain on some ag lime, and you say, what's the ECCE? He says, 65. You say, what's the price? He said, oh, it's about $35. He said, bring it on. Do you want that? We're going to show you a slide in just a minute. Next thing is nitrogen. Look at this. That's what a typical Bermuda grass and sandy soil is. Got none. You're not going to have much growth unless you have nitrogen fertilizer. It says you need 95 pounds of N immediately plus 100 pounds per acre for each of the 2 to 3 hay cuttings. So that's what that soil test is telling you. Plus, you don't have any phosphorus. I mean, you don't need any phosphorus. You've got plenty. But potash, you need 90 pounds. So it's going to tell you those main nutrients. You say, well, what about all these down here? You know, these are nutrients that they have to tell you that maybe you could use this or this. But for soil test, you're looking at primary nutrients of N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And if you cut, if it's not grazing, if it's just a hay meadow, and you produce, for every ton, it's going to remove 50 pounds of nitrogen, 14 pounds of phosphorus, and 42 pounds of potassium. And you're doing very well. You've got 2 tons. It's 128.84, and you're going to double that, and all of a sudden, from that Bermuda grass pasture, you've taken off, if it's 4 tons, you've taken off 200 pounds of nitrogen, about 56 pounds of phosphorus, and 165 pounds of K2O. You got to replace that. You got to replace that. Secondary nutrients, you don't have to be too concerned about these or this, as long as it's Bermuda grass. If it's alfalfa or a clover, then we pay more attention to some of the secondaries and even the micros. We want a balanced NPK for growth. Without that, you get something that would be skewed. Potassium for persistence. Tipton 85 likes this. This is coastal Bermuda grass. There's no potassium applied over here, whereas that's got it. Long term, some of the early work that we did at Overton showed that without potassium, you have a stubble root mass that looks like that, and with 240 pounds of K2O, you have a mass that looks like this. Survival through the winter is key for the persistence of potassium on Bermuda grass and also for dry matter production. Effect of soil pH on nutrient recovery. If the pH is 7, which it hardly is in East Texas, it is on the black land certainly, about a 90% recovery, 30-60 for P and K. And as the pH goes down into some levels that we can expect to be very common on those acid soils, then we can see that we're only recovering about 50% of the nitrogen that we've applied. So Bermuda grass is very tolerant to low pH soils. But the efficiency of use of the nutrients is very low. So you're not getting good utilization, but your sustainability of that stand is intact until such time that the potash becomes so low that you get winter kill. Now, limestone. Talked about ECC. I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Limestone quality soil test recommended. You put a ton of 100% ECCE, and you get a product. You call in, and the salesman says, the man says, I got some 50% ECCE. It's $35 a ton. That's good. But you got to put 2 tons on there to get the 100% ECCE 1 ton, and now you spent $70 an acre on that product. But the 100% ECC is more expensive. It's $50 a ton, and that's about what it is today in East Texas. You're only going to put a ton on, it's cost you $50. So make sure that you're comparing apples and apples and not oranges and apples on that. ECCE 100 is the name of the game for limestone if you need it. That would be called superfine lime. We see this, this expression all the time because it is a clover, crimson clover, with lime and crimson clover without lime. And that's a predictable event. With any of the legumes, they're very sensitive. White clover is the least sensitive. Arrowleaf clover and crimson may be the most, but it doesn't hold true just for clovers. It's also for ryegrass. This is ryegrass without lime. One of the visuals, low pH soil. You plant ryegrass in the fall, in the winter, it'll be 2 or 3 inches tall, brown tips, some yellow. You say, you know, we need another dose of fertilizer. Call the fertilizer guy, comes out in 2 or 3 weeks, looks the same. Call the fertilizer dealer and tell him we're not paying. He didn't bring anything. He brought the wrong stuff. Take a soil sample and it's 5.2. Aluminum toxicity captures and prevents growth of ryegrass. So don't do anything on overseeding or winter pasture. A lot of you are already doing this. Those of you are just thinking about that. Soil test, soil test, soil test. That will save you miseries and will enhance your success growing those cool season annual crops. Okay? Most important management strategies affecting ryegrass or clover: soil pH, variety, soil by clover adaptation, and on those deep sand, they call them themselves watermelon sands. Crimson clover would be the best for the transitional sites, arrowleaf, bald, and red. We don't have much red clover in Texas. And for the bottomland soils, only white clover. It's persistent there. It's adapted to that soil. That's the only one. We've got some choices. We have one out of Overton called Natchez white clover. There's a river called Natchez, and so that fits that very well. What about the organic beef? What about the naturally good beef? Lean beef, grass-fed, pasture-finished. We're going to talk about those, some description and definitions of those. So you just hold those definitions of what can you supplement or not, or what. What about organic beef? That's a sales pitch. Not a sales pitch. That's a sales terminology that will make it in anything that we want to do. So without nitrogen fertilizer, we have this little product here, broiler litter. Broiler litter. It's usable. You can use that instead of fertilizer. Inorganic fertilizer, you can apply broiler litter. What's broiler litter got in it? Magic. Broiler litter in a ton, pounds per ton. It's about a 111, although not quite. It's about, you can see the range over here of these percent nitrogen, P2O5 and K2O. But if in your mind's eye you just call it a 111, then you'd say, well, if I put a ton out there, I'm going to get about 60 pounds of N, P, and K2O. And that wouldn't be too bad. But the other little jewel in there, you're getting some calcium in that. Does that mean that it's going to increase my pH? No. But it is going to do some stabilization if you decide to put nitrogen fertilizer on those pastures. Now, I'll tell you more about the nitrogen fertilizer thing in just a minute. Broiler litter, range of this, it's about a 111. A great fertilizer because it does this. It contains other nutrients. We just said that. It's a slow release of all of those nutrients. Nitrogen and potash, K2O, are relatively mobile. They'll move on through the system unless the roots catch them. Phosphorus is going to maintain, and it'll stay intact most of the time. Okay? It contains calcium. That can maintain soil pH or not. Organic matter increases, and this is one of the big pluses for broiler litter, is that there's organic matter there that's going to enhance nutrient holding capabilities if you decide to go back and fertilize or not. Also increases water holding capabilities. Disadvantages, there's a variable nutrient content within and between. Okay, you can stay in that. That's not a big deal. The P level exceeds forage needs. Yep, that's not a big deal unless you're also in the broader business and you're not selling, you're using. We have 200 parts per million is a regulation of the phosphorus in your soil. You keep putting poacher litter, you'll build the phosphorus level up and above 200 parts per million if you're just grazing. Now, if you cut and carry, you will move, remember that little chart we showed on what you're removing out of the N, P, and K? You can remove some of that phosphorus, but until you own a broiler house, the broiler litter is not going to be a problem with you on phosphorus exceeding the needs on that property because you are getting nitrogen and you're getting potash. Odor, I always thought it smelled like money to me, but don't apply it if you live in a neighborhood and there's houses all around. That would be something. It's not always available when you want it. Or maybe you can't afford it. So let's talk about nitrogen fixation, perceptions, reality. We talked about that with legumes, nitrogen fixing. Forage legumes, and hopefully this may not even be in there. I may have added this later. Forage legumes fix atmospheric nitrogen through symbiosis with rhizobium bacteria. Now, the clovers, they fix nitrogen. And we got some information that says AgriLife or crimson clover can fix some 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. How do we agronomists come up with that number? We come up and says, well, we'll measure the dry matter. We've got 4,000 pounds of dry matter, and we've got so much percent nitrogen. And we measure it as protein. N times 6.25 is protein. So let's just say we've got, let's say it's pretty high quality. We've got 4% nitrogen. That'd be about 28% protein. So if it's 4% nitrogen and 4,000 pounds, what did we just fix? 160 pounds of nitrogen. Where did we fix it? Where did we fix it? We fixed it in the leaf and fixed it in the stem. It's not a fertilizer plant. This is not a nitrogen fertilizer plant that's pumping nitrogen into the soil. Not that. It's fixing nitrogen in itself, in the leaf. Well, how in the heck do I get it back on the grass? Two things. The nitrogen transfer is accomplished through grazing and recycling. So as you graze, you're recycling. Or if it's something you're starting new, you'll do what they did in the 20s and 30s, and it would be called green manure. That would be grow the clovers, and in that time it would be maybe soybeans or cowpeas, and plow those under. And they've captured the essence and the full benefit of the nitrogen that is fixed in the leaf and stem. They plowed it under into the soil. You're in the pasture business. You're not plowing the clovers under. You're going to be grazing them, and there's where the nutrient cycling comes in. Fixing it in the leaf and stem and not fixing it into the soil is going to get there, but only through grazing. Okay? So where are we headed? Well, they got the good news, bad news thing. The good news is that the additions of legumes to pasture can replace nitrogen fertilizer. That would be a positive for organic grass-fed beef, without a doubt. Broader litter is an excellent substitute, positive for organic, finished pasture grass-fed beef. Bad news is, though, those legumes are not always adapted to every soil type. They've got soil niches that they fit in best, and broader litter may not be available to you at the cost or at the time you need it. But you know, there's always good news, because everybody here has just saved 15% on your next car insurance. Dr. Gill has got those certificates. After the meeting, you can pick those up. You know, I have been here a long time. I was the youngest PhD at Overton. I was 15 when I got there, and we did these studies. Would that be 40 years ago? Dr. Carpenter and I did some studies and then followed that up. Dr. Ray Riley's still here. Can't get rid of him. Dr. Jeff Sable, he's over at the other building. Can't get rid of him. Did some of those on creep feeding and carcass, because we got interested in that with what we thought was a really good size, and it was, and fat calf at weaning with the terminal sire. And then we moved into some other opportunities with forage utilization and grain regimens, harvest after stockering, shelf life, and some of the other components there. AgriLife clover. AgriLife clover that we've allowed to grow and then get in there and use that pasture. That's the good news, because these calves are making good gain. They're stockers. They're about ready to come off. Sort of bridges the gap between if you run out of this and you move into that. But when you have those pastures that have that much AgriLife clover and you don't tend to them, you got that. And that would be not good for Bermuda grass survival. So there has to be a balance in that. A lot of good seed for next year, but now when the storm clears, there's no Bermuda grass under there because the AgriLife clover has outcompeted it. So you want something to bridge into the spring that has a blend of Bermuda grass and AgriLife clover. Let's go back to Tifton just for a moment and look at those challenges. The Tifton 85 would look something like that in not this time of the year, but a little bit later in mid-June. And making it on through the summertime, depending on what breed of animal you want. The crossbreds, he likes it. He's licking his chops on that. 100% Brahmins do great on Bermuda grass in the summertime. And if you can supplement may not fit the needs of that, we can go 1,100 pounds or more through the summertime and pull these calves off in October. Because that becomes one of the problems, is what are we going to do in the summertime with those calves? Stocking strategies, and I'll just go through this. You can use 2 or more sets to optimize the gain. If you come off pasture in late April to mid-May, graze Tifton until mid-June, and then initiate another set of stockers in early to mid-June, and these are not just stockers, they're calves that you're going to be using potentially as grass-finished calves, but it's going to give you a little bit of separation of animals so they don't all come in the first 2 weeks or the first 30 days. You'll move them throughout the summer. The strategy allows a flexible stocking rate and use of pastures to match the forage growth. Now, look at that real fast. If we come off of winter pasture with some calves and they're coming off at about 850, how many calves is that? It's about 5. 5 of those 850 calves to the acre. They're going to stay on there only from mid-April to June, and they're going to gain a little over 2 pounds a day. They've been gaining 2.7 to 2.8 on winter pasture. They're going to phase down some, and they're going to sell them off at 1,500, 1,250. Then, when you move those off, you got this other set of cattle that now we're going to move right in and graze through the rest of the summer. And these are 7-weight cattle, and you got 5 of those to the acre. How do we get 5 on there? We're going to show you. They only gained 1.7. This would be a good gain on Bermuda grass. 1 pound to 1.5 pounds are acceptable gains. Those are the gains you live with. Tifton 85 in this particular year with those cattle, we've got 1 3/4. They came off at 875. Is that good enough or not? That's the system. That's where you are with Tifton 85 with Bermuda grasses in general. But on that acre, we had 1,582 pounds of gain. So we're treating stuff as end product. We want average daily gain, but we also are going to have to pay for the fertilizer. And so the fertilizer bill was less than 140, but I put this in there because at the time, the fertilizer, we put 150 to 200 pounds of nitrogen on those pastures. And if they had gained only 500 pounds, they gained 1,500, but if they'd only gained 500, the fertilizer cost per pound of gain at that cost would have been 28 cents. And if we had to fertilize more for some reason, that's not what the cost was, but I just put that in there for an example, the fertilizer cost would have been 40 cents. But we're down here in the range of 1,000 to 1,200 pounds, and so now the cost of the fertilizer per pound of gain is less than 15 cents on Tifton 85 if we fertilize it with 150 to 200 pounds of N. Today, fertilizer nitrogen costs between 55 and 60 cents a pound of N spread, regardless of whether that is urea, 4600, ammonium nitrate, if you can get that, and you still can, 3400, or a urea ammonium sulfate blend, that's 3300, or ammonium sulfate, which is 2100. Now, we talked about pH. Here's a rule of thumb pearl for you. It's not in your handout. Nitrogen fertilizer is an acidifying, lowers the pH of the soil. And Dr. Habe spent a long career at Overton, and he found this, that if you use either urea or ammonium nitrate, for every 1 pound of nitrogen of any one of those two sources, it takes 2 pounds of lime to offset that acidifying factor. But if you use ammonium sulfate, it takes 5 pounds of lime to offset that. So ammonium sulfate has sulfur, 21%. It's a great product. It also is the most acidifying. Okay, we got other stuff here. We're going to try to finish it. So, utilization, animal production efficiency, stocking methods, stocking rates, stocking strategies. So is it rotational that you want? There's a lot of information that you can find in popular press talking about rotational stocking, mob grazing, this, that. Stocking rules, what do you want? What does it do for you? What do you get? What's the perception versus reality? For continuous versus rotation for forage production, forage dry matter production is greater on rotational compared to continuous because you're allowing it to rest, makes growth, it's like a hayfield. The dry matter advantage is about 30%. The utilization efficiency, harvest efficiency, is improved with rotational stocking. The nutritive value of what the cattle are grazing is higher on continuous because those animals are selecting. What are they selecting? Leaf. Leaf selectors, higher nutritive value on the continuous, because it's the growth, regrowth, graze rather than rotational, where you're forcing those cattle to graze what's there and down to a short stubble. Now, long-term studies, lots of studies involved in this, says animal performance is not enhanced by the method. In fact, with Bermuda grass, we've got studies here in Texas, we've got studies at Overton, that says that with stalker cattle and rotational stocking, you can decrease average daily gain by rotational stocking over continuous, depending on how long you leave the cattle to have a utilization factor that you want. And I'm not talking about to the dirt. I'm talking about a utilization factor that could be 70, 80, 90%. The gain per acre then, at the same stocking rate, there's a little bit of advantage for rotational. And at some variable stocking rate, that means you're in charge, you're controlling it. Then there's some advantage for a continuous stocking. What all that says is that at the same stocking rate, there's no animal gain advantage from rotational stocking versus continuous stocking. But it does allow you to manage your pastures. That's one of the good things that it does. It allows you are in control. You are in charge of the forage growth and forage utilization. Why do we not get that? Because we are forcing consumption of the forage in the lower strata of that Bermuda grass, and that's where the low quality is, and that's where the low gains are. So you put cattle on a pasture for 2 days, 5 days, 7 days, they graze just like this, and when they get down to the bottom, all of a sudden, the longer you leave the cattle grazing that lower strata, lower quality, the lower is their average daily gain, and voila, you leave them on a little bit longer, and all you've done is practice. All you've done is practice, because the calves aren't making any gain. They gain great the first day, they gain bad the last 2 or 3 days. So what in the world can you do? How you do that? Well, there's a lot of thoughts. One thought, graze only the top part. Graze on the top third of the half. That's where the best nutritive value, that's where the leaves are, and then move them on. Yeah, what are you going to do what's left? Well, you can graze that with dry cows, or you can cut hay. You say, well, it's lower quality. Yes, it is. You have neighbors. They don't know. Stocking rate is more important than stocking method. The stocking rate. Bermuda grass pastures. We add more cattle, the forage look. How sustainable are those programs? Not. You're not in this business. You're not in this business here of stocking that heavy and having animals that are conditioned. That's not your business, especially in grass-fed. You've got other things that you do. So the stocking rate, I've learned this hanging around Ron and other guys at the extent. It depends. It depends whether, we have a lot of error in our studies sometimes for dadgum. She knows to stay back on that test pasture. So stocking rates are site-specific. I call them zip code specific. And they're management controlled. Now, we'll go here real fast. Winter-born calves, forage pasture systems, ryegrass clovers, warm season perennial grass plus creep feed, if you can or not. Harvest those calves at weaning after stalker period. Harvest at weaning October, November. And extended harvest as a stalker off of small grains. And this becomes, for the winter-born calf, this becomes something that you can move those calves in off of the small grains as stalkers. I'm going to move on to those fall wean calves, and this is where the fall wean calves gives you the full opportunity of putting the best nutritive value that you have access to. The calf as a stalker, small grain ryegrass, extend that time on warm season perennial grass or warm season annual grass, and the harvest options then would be in May and July. So those cool season pastures turn into something like that. We've showed that picture. The management timing is that you anticipate the forage dry matter production for the next period of time, next 30 days. And as we enter those pastures, this is delayed stocking so that we wanted to start the cattle with that kind of a forage mass. The challenges are climate, rainfall. The pitfalls is that we like to stock those pastures as soon as we see green stock. This is not to draw any derogatory information on wheat stalker operations, but the wheat stalker operations in general in most of Texas are not tied to forage finished beef. They're in there for another reason. They want to precondition those calves. They want to keep them healthy, keep them alive, and they're going to graze them for a period of time and take them to the feedlot. It is not about meeting optimum, maximum, average daily gains. They're looking for gain per acre, and they're looking for live calves. So, pitfalls, stock too early with respect to available forage dry matter and climatic conditions. So the stocking rate, going to the winter, moving in this Bermuda grass, overseeded with ryegrass. These are, what condition is that calf? He's not condition score 6, and he's not gaining over 2 pounds a day. So you can say that he wants out of that to get a little bit better stocking rate. It's better outside, always better outside. But as we decrease that stocking rate, you can just visualize, and you can see it in the pastures that we have these stocking strategies, that those calves then up, and now we've gone to a point like this. And this is what's happening right today, low stocking rate pastures. This is Maton rye. Calf is not as fat as we may want him. He may have to do something else on Tifton 85, but we've got this. This is Bermuda grass. Now we've got this. Did we plan for that? We did. But what we want to do is come in and make baleage out of that, high quality nutritive value, where it's a small grain, using that as our hay crop, as a baleage operation. You can't make good hay in the spring. So some of the management timings on those calves, calves coming off those pastures, you can see the body condition scores on those calves. No supplementation, ryegrass pastures, and that would be their condition. That would be what your visual target, 1,000, 1,100 pound calves. This calf was over, we showed you him at the first. Now, we're looking for, in all those studies, we're looking to optimize with stocking rate. We want to optimize gain per animal. We want it all. We want best gain per animal, best gain per acre. But as we increase the stocking rate, gain per animal is coming down. We're trying to stay somewhere in here for an economic optimum if it's a stocker business, but for you who want to maximize that gain per animal, you're back here. We've got those kind of studies. This is a 7-year trial just to show you our data kind of fits that data. If you have some imagination, average daily gains of over 3 pounds a day, increase in stocking rates, it'll move right down here to less than 1.5 pounds. Gain per acre moves right up here from 500 pounds to nearly 1,000 pounds of gain per acre in a more conventional stocker operation and not grass-fed. So, what's easy and what's not? The easiest pastures and strategies for 90-day periods include small grain, ryegrass, clover pastures, and match the animal class. What is it? Is it a cow-calf? Is it a stocker steer? Is it a weaned heifer? What do you have there? Weight age is set to be harvested from mid-April to mid-June, and the average daily gain you're sitting at, you want at least 2 1/4, but you would like to get into the 3s. And with those calves that have access, when they have all that waste of forage, those calves gain over 3 pounds a day because they have ad libitum selection. That's good news. The bad news is we've got too much forage there going into the summer, so we've got to take advantage of that. The next easiest would be something with Tifton 85. The average daily gains from 1.5 pounds to 2 1/4. The most difficult is from mid-October to mid-April. We have reduced availability of actively growing forages, and especially without supplementation. So, the harvest months, if you're looking to harvest those months in April, June, it could be from a stocker or it could be from a cow-calf. It's kind of a no-brainer because that's the best. If you want to harvest that calf in June or July, a cow-calf or stocker, either one, you kind of be creative with Tifton 85. And if you've got stockers in July through September, it's a challenge. It's a challenge with just the grass because the average daily gain without supplementation, regardless of whether it's a summer annual or a summer perennial, is going to be low. So, cow-calf harvest in October through December, it's a lotto. It's a lotto unless you're supplementing them. So, grass-fed, not necessarily pasture-finished. Do them the old-fashioned way, direct off pasture. Offset seasonality of forage production by offering hay or silage on pasture. Corn silage, I think, is allowable as a grass crop. Corn silage is used in the feedlot. Corn silage is high nutritive value, as a thought. 70% dry matter, sorghum silage. Feed alfalfa hay on pasture. Feed stored forages, free choice or restricted intake. So it doesn't have to be, your hands are not tied and they got to graze, says forage. And you supply that forage, however, to meet the needs of the average daily gains that you want. So match those forage seasonality of production, climate, nutrient requirements. The limitations are always forage nutritive value, stocking rate for gain per animal, gain per acre. Conserved forages, hay and silage could be a very big part of blending and meshing together the deficiencies and active growing of your forage. Animal production, targeted niches. Does it include supplementation or does it not? What is the target of beef you're going with? So, strategies, work with the facts, and deal with the perceptions that are out there and kind of plague around, but use the facts. And so from facts for us, our website, overton.tamu.edu, we have the most complete set of forage data, forage animal data, soil data. Log on to that. Sometimes it's not as easy to find it once you get in there, but we have a great data set there at the Overton Center. And by the way, I wasn't there when we opened up, but they opened up without me. Got there as fast as I could. June 15th is our 50th anniversary. I don't know where all my slides have gone. I think somebody's been playing with those. But for the pasture niches that we've tried to express, forages becomes the baseline. Soil becomes the baseline for the forage, and that sort of rolls in that term. Hey,